Hello and welcome. You're watching Democracies of the World, our show on Sansad TV, where we take you through the latest happenings from parliaments across the globe. In today's edition, we will talk about general elections in Italy, where voters rewarded Giorgia Meloni's Eurosceptic party with huge gains, taking the country towards what is likely to be its first far-right-led government since World War II. In the next half an hour, we will also take a look at Latin America's most populous nation, Brazil, facing the most polarized presidential race in decades. I'm your host, Bhwana, Nayar. Let's begin our show with Italy elections. As Europe is gripped by rising inflation and energy costs, voters in Italy elected a hard-right coalition led by Giorgia Meloni, who is set to become the country's prime minister. That means Italy, which has seen 67 governments come and go since World War II, is likely to be led by a woman for the first time. However, it may take a few weeks before Meloni is called to form the government. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also congratulated Giorgia Meloni on her victory in the elections.
Giorgia Meloni, leader of the Brothers of Italy party, won the Italian election on Sunday, defeating Mario Draghi by a huge margin. By doing so, Giorgia has become Italy's first female prime minister, and that too of a right-wing government. Giorgia forged a pre-poll alliance with two parties, Forza Italia and the League respectively. According to reports, the alliance claimed over 43% votes, which would translate to 114 seats in the Senate. A political party needs 104 seats to claim a majority in the Italian Senate. After her victory, Meloni, however, promised that her government would work for everyone. Meloni emerged as a political leader from the fringes. The 45-year-old successfully worked her way up from grassroots politics and successfully led the opposition against Mario Draghi. She became popular during her vibrant movement in 1990s against immigrants and the LGBTQ community. Her fierce opposition to European Union has also been well known. As a champion of sovereignty, Meloni's party backed Draghi's support for arms to Ukraine and says she's a staunch backer of the NATO alliance. Last year, hers was the only major party to refuse to join the pandemic National Unity Coalition of Premier Mario Draghi. Draghi was accused of running a technocratic government, though he managed to stabilize the Italian economy following the traumatic shock of the pandemic. The former European Central Bank chief's government collapsed last month, abruptly abandoned by Matteo Salvini, Silvio Berlusconi, and five-star leader former Premier Giuseppe Conte. However, Giorgia's far-right political campaign proved to be acceptable among the masses, which helped her claim victory.
Moving on, the major opposition party in the Czech Republic appeared to be leading in the first round of elections for one-third of the seats in Parliament's upper house, the Senate. Led by former Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, the centrist ANO party will send 17 candidates to next weekend's Senate election runoff. They also won municipal elections in most of the Czech Republic's regional capitals held last week. The Czech Statistics Office said two candidates had reached the 50% threshold to win seats outright, leaving 25 seats to be decided in runoffs between the two finishers in each race. The outright winners included one candidate from ANO and one from the Christian Democrats, a member of the governing five-party coalition. The coalition currently has a clear majority in the Senate, which has 81 members in all. In other development, thousands of protesters rallied again in the Czech capital on Wednesday to condemn the Czech government's handling of the energy crisis and its support for Ukraine. The Czech Republic, similar to other European Union member countries, has been struggling with soaring inflation pushed by mainly high energy prices. The opposition has been saying that the government of Prime Minister Petru Fiala has done too little too late to help the people. On Sunday, one of the world's biggest democracies, Brazil, will hold what many are describing as its most important presidential election in years. The first round of Brazil presidential elections, scheduled for October 2, sees Bolsonaro come up against his political nemesis and former leftist president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva in what has become Brazil's most polarized race in decades. Opinion polls show frontrunner Luiz Inácio da Silva ahead in the polls. Brazilians will also go to the polls to vote for their country's next vice president and National Congress, as well as for governors and state legislative assemblies. Here's a report.
Brazilians will make history when they vote for their president this October. For the first time, the only two candidates with a real chance of victory are a current president and a former one. The incumbent is Jair Bolsonaro, a right-wing populist who has been in office since 2019. Opposing him is the former leftist president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, commonly known as Lula. Meanwhile, both the candidates vying for the presidency of Brazil have stepped up their campaigning, hoping to clinch enough support to win outright in the first round of voting on October 2nd. In the lead-up to the first round, both candidates are concentrating their campaigns in the richest, most populous states of Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro and Minas Gerais, among others. While Lula's campaign is focused on convincing Brazilians they were better off when he was president and that Bolsonaro is a threat to democracy, Bolsonaro has tried to cast Lula as a radical socialist and himself as a Brazil savior. Bolsonaro, who is running under the banner of the Liberal Party, is a former army captain and backbench politician who rode a wave of popular discontent about corruption, crime and the economy to win Brazil's presidential election in 2018. His government's modest economic triumphs, including pension reform, were overshadowed by rampant deforestation in the Amazon and a disastrous response to the COVID-19 pandemic. His support is highest in the agricultural western states. At the other side of this electoral contest, requesting a second chance from the Brazilian voters, is Lula, a former union leader who ended his term in 2010 as the most popular president in the country's history, but has since become an increasingly divisive figure. He has high support in Brazil's poor northeast. The first round of the election will be held on 2nd October, with the second round scheduled for 30th October if none of the candidates get 50% of the vote. Women who prefer Lula and evangelics who favor Bolsonaro will play a decisive role in the final result.
The Brazilian parliament is called National Congress. Besides making laws, the National Congress is responsible for the oversight of every accounting, financial and budgetary operations. However, the country has adopted the presidential political system. Let's take a look. How does Brazil's parliament work?
Brazil is a federal republic composed of 26 states and a federal district. The Brazilian federal government is divided in three branches: the executive, which is headed by the president and the cabinet; the legislative, whose powers are vested by the constitution in the National Congress; and the judiciary, whose powers are vested in the Supreme Federal Court and the lower federal courts. Legislative powers is exercised by the Brazilian parliament called National Congress. National Congress is bicameral, composed of the Senate and the Chamber of Deputies. Both houses are located in the building known as the Palace of National Congress, which is located in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. Both chambers are elected directly every 4 years on the same day as the first round of the elections for the President of Republic, as well as for governors of states and members of regional legislatures. The 513-seat Chamber of Deputies consists of representatives of the states elected every 4 years by direct universal suffrage. The number of deputies is in rough proportion to the population of each state, but no state can be represented in the chamber by more than 70 or by fewer than 8 deputies. The 81-seat Federal Senate is composed of 3 representatives from each state and the Federal District, who serve 8-year terms. Senatorial elections are held every 4 years, alternating between 1/3 and the remaining 2/3 of the seats. Senators are directly elected by the residents of each state. Executive power is exercised by the President, who is head of state and government and is directly elected to a 4-year term and is eligible for one re-election, appoints a cabinet of various ministers of state and several other heads of ministerial level departments. The President is also Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. The President and the Vice President of Brazil are elected as a joint ticket using the 2-round system. The first round of elections is held on the first Sunday of October. A candidate who receives more than 50% of the total valid votes in the first round is elected. If the 50% threshold is not met by any candidate, the 2 candidates who receive the most votes in the first round participate in the second round of voting held on the last Sunday of October, and the candidate who receives the most votes in the second round is elected. The Brazilian judicial system is divided into 2 branches: the ordinary branch, made up of state and federal courts, and the special branch, made up of labor, electoral and military courts.
Thousands of Colombians took to the streets on Monday to reject the first economic reforms proposed by the government of Gustavo Petro. Petro presented the reforms before Congress, where he has majority, including a tax reform that proposes to raise taxes on the wealthiest to finance ambitious social plans aimed at reducing poverty. Interior Minister Alfonso Parada gave a positive assessment of the day's protest and assured that any expressions of disagreement will always be welcome and listened to. And now news coming in from Cuba. Cuba has legalized same-sex marriage after Cubans voted in favor of a family code that increased protections for minorities on the island, the country's National Electoral Council announced this week. The new family code extends greater protection to women, children and the elderly, as well as allowing LGBTQ couples to marry and adopt children. For decades, LGBTQ people in Cuba faced official discrimination on the communist-run island. Cuba's growing evangelical community in particular had openly advocated against approving the family code. But in the weeks before the referendum, the Cuban government made a full court press in favor of the new family code across state-run media, arguing the new code is proof of the island's now more than decades-old revolution that is capable of adapting to the times. And slipping into a very short break here, there's a lot more coming up on the other side. You stay tuned to Sansad TV. Welcome back after the break. You're watching our special program, Democracies of the World. Moving on, Japan bid farewell to former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in an elaborate state funeral on Tuesday, despite public opposition to the cost of the event as the country grapples with their late leader's legacy. The event was attended by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US Vice President Kamala Harris, Japanese Crown Prince Akishino and other foreign and Japanese dignitaries.
Japan honoured slain former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe on Tuesday at the first state funeral for a former premier in 55 years with flowers, prayers and a 19-gun salute. The ceremony started with Abe's ashes carried into the Nippon Budokan Hall in central Tokyo by his widow, Aki Abe, to music from a military band and the booms of the honor guard salute that echoed inside the hall. In the hall, a large portrait of Abe draped with black ribbon hung over a bank of green, white and yellow flowers. A moment of silence was followed by a retrospective of Abe's political life and speeches by leading ruling party figures including Fumio Kishida and Yoshihide Suga, Abe's successors as Prime Ministers. The ceremony was attended by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, US Vice President Kamala Harris, former UK Prime Minister Theresa May, and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, among others. Meanwhile, the ceremony also saw public opposition over the huge costs incurred and also because state funerals are reserved for the imperial family. This is only the second time a politician is getting a state funeral. The last one was decades ago. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, however, said the longest-serving leader in Japan's modern political history deserves the honor. Abe was Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister and one of the country's most recognizable political figures, known for cultivating international alliances and his Abenomics economic strategy. Abe served 2 terms as Prime Minister, stepping down in 2020. But he had remained a dominant presence over the ruling Liberal Democratic Party, controlling one of its major factions. Abe's first stint as Prime Minister was brief, for a little over a year starting in 2006, and controversial. But he made a surprising political comeback in 2012, staying in power until 2020 when he resigned for health reasons. Japan was in a recession when he began his second term, and his economic policy was credited with helping return growth to a faltering economy. He oversaw Japan's recovery from a massive earthquake and tsunami in Tohoku in 2011. He was succeeded by close party ally Yoshihide Suga, but was still seen as a powerful figure in Japanese politics. Bureau Report, Sansad TV.
The International Monetary Fund has urged the UK government to re-evaluate a package of unfunded tax cuts that it says may fuel inflation and are likely to increase economic inequality. Experts said the IMF's statement was prompted by both the implications for the global economy of the UK shooting itself in the foot and wanting to show that it is even-handed in its criticism of economic policies. The government of Prime Minister Liz Truss last week unveiled a £45 billion package of tax cuts in an effort to spur economic growth. But the plan wasn't accompanied by spending cuts or even an independent cost estimate, raising concerns that it would swell government debt and add to inflation that is already running at a close to a 40-year high. Swedish lawmakers on Monday reappointed Andreas Norlén of the Conservative Moderates Party as Speaker of Parliament, one of the several steps needed before a new government can take office following a September 11 election win by right-wing parties. Moderates leader Ulf Kristersson has handed a mandate to try and form a government after nearly a decade of Social Democrat-led rule and is widely expected to form a minority cabinet supported by anti-immigration Sweden Democrats. The Speaker declined to say when Parliament will vote on a new government. However, while the Sweden government and the Democrats won more seats in Parliament than the Moderates, Kristersson has wider backing among other parties and is thus seen as a favourite to become the next Prime Minister. Andreas Norlén remains Parliament Speaker, a position he has held since 2018. And now Saudi Arabia's powerful Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was appointed Prime Minister on Tuesday by royal decree. The Crown Prince, who is heir to the throne held by King Salman, already wields wide powers and is seen as the kingdom's day-to-day leader. The royal decree appointing him as Prime Minister was carried by the Saudi press agency. It said that King Salman will continue to chair the cabinet meetings that he attends. The 37-year-old Crown Prince, widely known by the acronym MBS, has taken the lead on Vision 2030, the kingdom's wide-ranging plan to transform its economy and end its dependency on oil. Around 8 lakh Kuwaiti voters voted on Thursday to elect 50 members of the country's National Assembly. This comes after Kuwait's Crown Prince dissolved parliament in June and called for early elections. The move was taken to ease a government gridlock that has bred popular opposition and paralyzed the tiny country for months. There are 376 candidates in the race, including 349 men and 27 women. Mohammad al-Dosari, one of the candidates, said that he hopes the elections will bring development to Kuwait. Parliament is empowered to pass and block laws, question ministers and submit no-confidence votes against senior officials. However, final authority rests with the ruling emir. And that's all we have in this edition of our program on Democracies of the World. Connect with us on various social media platforms for all the latest from around the world. Thanks for staying in. Stay tuned for more informative programs on Sansad TV. Till then, goodbye. Namaskar.